Is a CBS 4 News special report.
To have two wives die of freak accidents, the odds are better off that you win the Powerball lottery.
In each death, Harold Henthorn was the sole witness.
Mr. Henthorn. Hi, I'm Brian Moss from Channel 4.
He is a manipulator. He's a scan artist. He's a prey on women.
Now, two families are asking the same questions.
Did you kill both of your wives?
I'm still in disbelief. I have to keep reminding myself, she's gone, and I won't see her anymore here on earth.
It's a story that spans 2 decades, a story of 2 wives and 2 mysterious deaths. Tonight, we take you inside the investigation. Harold Henthorn. And now, Brian Moss.
This is Sand Hill Street in Highlands Ranch, and that is the home where Harold Henthorn, his wife Toni, and their daughter lived until Toni fell to her death in Rocky Mountain National Park in 2012. And Harold Henthorn was subsequently arrested and charged with his wife's murder. The case has triggered worldwide interest in how one husband had 2 wives die in freak accidents that were so similar in so many ways. Tonight, CBS 4 takes you inside the investigation with new interviews, new information into a case that has captured so much attention. The central question, is Harold Henthorn simply a victim of very bad luck, or is he a black widow husband?
You say something.
From the outside looking in, the Henthorn family seemed just right. Toni Henthorn, a well-liked ophthalmologist. Her husband Harold telling people he was a fundraiser for charities and nonprofits. And they had a darling daughter, Haley. They lived at the end of this cul-de-sac in Highlands Ranch. But Toni Henthorn's family in Mississippi had doubts about Harold, who they felt talked a little too fast, was a little too slick, and they believed was too controlling of his wife. Rhonda Bertollet was Toni's sister-in-law.
I had feelings from the beginning that, just didn't feel right about the guy.
Todd Bertollet was Toni's brother.
You couldn't call Denver and speak specifically with my sister. He would always have to be in the background.
But what had been vague, uneasy feelings about Harold Henthorn turned to terror and sadness in September of 2012. That's when Harold Henthorn decided to surprise Toni with a hike in Rocky Mountain National Park for the couple's anniversary. They would be the last steps Toni Henthorn would ever take.
You know what my first statement was? He shoved her.
I keep asking myself, did it really happen? Every morning I ask, was that a dream?
It was much more akin to a nightmare for Toni Henthorn's family and friends. A nightmare that would turn into a 3-year journey of shifting stories, heartbroken families, and questions about where the coincidences end, where deliberation begins, and if law enforcement made a serious misjudgment about Harold Henthorn. Hi, I'm Brian Moss. CBS 4 began looking for answers, supported by the CBS News program 48 Hours.
Yes, that it was an incomplete investigation.
My opinion is that he's done something very, very bad, and he's probably done it more than once, and I think that it's all going to come back to bite him.
Very powerful words from Henthorn's brother-in-law. CBS 4's Brian Moss has filed dozens of reports on Henthorn over the past 2.5 years. It's turned into a huge story. How did it start for you?
It started, interestingly enough, with an anonymous email into the newsroom. It was very short, just a couple of lines, and the person who wrote it simply said, "You ought to look into the death of Harold Henthorn's first wife," which was very odd and very unusual as well, 17 years earlier. But it felt like the person who wrote that email knew a lot and felt like there was something there that we needed to take a look at.
Still, the email was anonymous. Where do you go with that?
The first thing I had to do really was find out about the death of the first wife, Lynn, which was in 1995. Not a lot of information available on that because it was just an accidental death, but I found out what I needed. I went down to the Henthorn neighborhood. Mr. Henthorn didn't want to talk to me. He made that clear. but the neighbors were very helpful. But the real key was when I talked to Toni Henthorn's family, they made it clear to me right away that they felt that her death was suspicious and that it didn't add up.
He had a hand in my sister's death.
No doubt in your mind?
There's no doubt in my mind.
When we return, X marks the spot on a mysterious map, and why Toni's family thinks this wasn't Harold's first attempt at killing her.
I don't think I would be with him alone in a secluded place. I just don't have a good feeling about it.
This is the scenic view from Deer Mountain in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's where Harold Henthorn brought his second wife, Toni, for an anniversary weekend hike in September 2012, a hike that ended with Toni Henthorn's death. It was a death he proclaimed was an accident, but that would then lead to questions about how Harold Henthorn's first wife had died 17 years earlier.
From the start, Toni Henthorn's friends and family thought there was something a little bit off about the anniversary hike. Harold Henthorn appeared at her medical office and surprised her with news that he was whisking her away for a romantic anniversary weekend hike.
She had a bad knee, so hiking wasn't a big thing for her. Would she go for a walk and go sightseeing? Absolutely. She loved to get exercise, but by no means would she go rock climbing or on anything vigorous.
Although smiling in these pictures taken during the hike, Toni Henthorn would soon be dead, falling 140 feet from a cliff.
I've gotten to the point where I can handle everything, but those words still keep coming up in my mind, you know, she's gone.
The rocky knob where she fell was well off the main path, and her husband's explanation for what happened was evolving. He told shifting stories, each version indicating he didn't see what happened. Toni was taking a picture when she slipped and fell, he said at one point. He was reading a text message on his phone. Then he was looking for a text message on his phone. She was checking a text message when she lost her balance. As soon as Toni Henthorn's family heard about the fatal fall via these text messages from him, they had their doubts.
I took it immediately as him doing this.
He had a hand in my sister's death.
No doubt in your mind?
There's no doubt in my mind.
And Toni's family was not alone in their suspicion. The coroner declined to call it an accident, instead saying Toni Henthorn fell or was pushed down a cliff. The manner of death is undetermined. Homicide cannot be excluded.
I've never seen a conclusion like that, and I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of autopsy reports.
Ellis Armistead, a former homicide investigator for police departments and prosecutors, reviewed the coroner's findings that Toni Henthorn's fall might have been a premeditated, intentional push.
I find that an unusual conclusion to an autopsy report.
That froze $4.5 million in life insurance on Toni that would have benefited Harold. Rhonda Bertollet was Toni's sister-in-law.
I put myself on that cliff and try to imagine not seeing my baby ever again because of someone, taking me away. And I just, that's my biggest pain for her, is that she did not get, a chance to see her child again and to grow and to be a lady and get married.
Although Harold said it was an accident, there were immediate red flags for investigators. When they searched his car, they found a map with an X on the map close to where Toni fell, way off the beaten path. Investigators said Harold Henthorn was unable to explain why there was an X at the spot near where his wife fell. And almost immediately, Harold had his wife cremated against the wishes of her family.
Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty.
By the time this memorial service was held for Toni Henthorn 5 days after the fall, local, state, and federal investigators had received 16 emails and calls from friends of Toni's, urging further investigation. They were not convinced it was an accident. And then we learned of another accident involving Harold and Toni Henthorn. It happened in 2011 at the couple's cabin in Grand Lake. At night, Harold said during some work on the cabin, he accidentally dropped a beam on his wife's head.
And she said, Mama, we were up at the cabin, and Harold called me outside, and he was up working on the beam of the porch. And she said, if I had not reached to get whatever it was on the floor, I think that it would have killed me on the spot.
Tony Henthorn suffered serious, permanent injuries. Federal investigators now believe this was Harold Henthorn's first attempt to kill his wife.
Then later, I told her, I said, Tony, I don't think I would be with him alone in a secluded place. I just don't have a good feeling about it.
So when Tony did die a year later in a secluded place with her husband, many friends would urge federal investigators to take a closer look at something else: the death of Harold Henthorn's first wife, 17 years earlier.
It can happen, but bad luck can happen to somebody. There's no getting around that. But it always causes me, when I see cases like this, to be suspicious.
It was ruled an accident, and the case was closed for 17 years. Still to come, re-examining the death of Henthorn's first wife, Lynn, and what the Douglas County Sheriff is saying now.
Do you think Lynn Henthorn's death was an accident, or do you think it was intentional? Welcome back, and welcome to the rural foothills of Douglas County. I'm along Highway 67, about 9 miles west of Sedalia. This is an area known as Casey's Curve. And after the death of Harold Henthorn's second wife, Tony, in 2012, we decided to take a closer look at the death of his first wife, Lynn, 17 years earlier. She died right here. And what we found raised a lot of questions about the stories Harold Henthorn told about that death. And it raised a lot of questions about the Douglas County Sheriff's investigation. Friends and family say Harold Henthorn and his first wife, Lynn, had what appeared to be a good, loving marriage with no outward signs of trouble.
I think Lynn was very much in love with Harold, but I don't know if Lynn, I don't think, something makes me think that Lynn might not have been happily married.
In May of 1995, after 12 years of marriage, the couple left their suburban Denver home for an evening drive into the foothills west of Sedalia. But they stopped late that night in this dark, remote location to change a tire that Harold said was soft, not flat, just a bit mushy, according to Harold. It was a tire change that would go horribly wrong, with Lynn Henthorn ending up under the Jeep slipping off a jack, crushing and killing the 37-year-old social worker. Harold Henthorn was the only witness to what happened.
It didn't seem like that was an accident.
We tracked down Patricia Montoya, who was in a carload of people who stopped to help the Henthorns that night.
He got kind of angry at us, and I thought that was odd that he got angry after stopping us to help him. He didn't want us to touch her.
Montoya said Henthorn's behavior was bizarre. It was a cold night, but he refused to take his jacket off and cover his wife as the Montoya group pitched in to help.
It was creepy. It was like he was trying to harm her. We all said that he probably set it up to where that car fell on her. And that was all of our thoughts.
Lynn Henthorn would die of her injuries the next morning. Within a few days, Patricia Montoya went to the Douglas County Sheriff's Department asking if they had arrested Harold Henthorn yet. No way that woman ended up under the car like that, she told authorities. But 6 days after Lynn Henthorn's death, the coroner and the Douglas County Sheriff declared the case an accident and shut down their investigation.
They should have looked at everything, and they should not have ruled it an accident within a week. I thought that was shocking that they didn't look into it more.
But we did look further, obtaining the Sheriff's Department case file, which they have never released. And it contains numerous red flags about what happened that night. Just like with the death of Tony Henthorn, Harold told wildly inconsistent stories about the night Lynn Henthorn died. To one investigator, he said he and his wife were on their way to dinner. To another, he said they had finished dinner and were going on a drive. He told some investigators he helped pull his wife out from under the car, but told others he didn't know how she got out from under the Jeep.
There wasn't a wagon here.
Suzette Beiswinger has lived in the area for years. The night of the accident, her husband, who's now dead, was called to the scene. When he came home, he told his wife something wasn't right.
Just didn't add up.
Didn't add up.
Yeah. It seemed like he thought it was suspicious.
Harold Henthorn told investigators his wife ended up under the Jeep because she was holding lug nuts when she apparently dropped one, then scrambled under the car to retrieve it. That's when he said he threw the soft tire in the back of the Jeep, causing the jack to slip.
I don't see how she could have been under there like that. I wouldn't have done that.
Even though Harold Henthorn told police his wife dropped a lug nut and went to retrieve it, he told another friend he was the one who dropped the lug nut, then told his wife to go under the car and get it.
I've changed enough tires, and I wouldn't be under there like that.
Before ruling the case an accident, the Douglas County Sheriff seemed to miss or not follow up on a number of clues. The jack that Harold Henthorn said failed was never tested to see if it was working properly. Investigators never took apart the tire that Harold Henthorn said was mushy that night. And although they said they found a shoe print right near the spot on the Jeep where the jack failed, they apparently never asked him if he had kicked the Jeep or about all his conflicting stories.
Do you believe that 1995 investigation was thorough and complete and up to your standards?
For today's standards?
Your standards.
Well, I think that if we had a chance to do it all over again, we'd probably do some things different based on today.
Current Douglas County Sheriff Tony Spurlock would not criticize his department's 1995 investigation that concluded Lynn Henthorn's death was an accident.
Do you think Lynn Henthorn's death was an accident, or do you think it was intentional?
I think Lynn Henthorn's death, one, is tragic and unfortunate, and I think that it is extremely suspicious based upon the information that I've been briefed up to this date based upon the investigation over the last 27 months. I think it's very suspicious.
Think it was an accident?
I do not think it's an accident.
That would suggest you think it was a murder.
Well, I think it's suspicious. I'm not prepared to say that this is a murder case yet.
Douglas County reopened the Lynn Henthorn case after the death of Tony Henthorn. In an effort to make a criminal case against Harold Henthorn, they've done 40 new interviews. And we've learned they also wired friends of Harold Henthorn's, hoping to catch Henthorn either confessing or making an incriminating statement. At the same time, the Douglas County coroner Laura Thomas also reviewed the Lynn Henthorn case.
I also don't have enough information to convince me that Lynn's death was an accident. And that's why I changed the death certificate to undetermined.
Brian, obviously getting the sheriff's file on the death of Lynn Henthorn, critical to figuring out what happened to the first wife. That file wasn't easy to get, though.
It should have been. It was a public record ever since her death in 1995. So when I went down there to get it, the clerk said it would take several hours to copy it. When I finally had that kind of time and went back just a few days later, the file was gone. The sheriff had decided to reopen their case. They had sealed that file. So we had to find another way to get it, and we did.
Investigators bugged Harold Henthorn, bugged his conversations with friends, maybe trying to make up for lost time in the investigation into Lynn Henthorn's death. This many years later, is it reasonable to think there could be some charges out of this?
Experts, defense attorneys who I've talked to say this is going to be really hard. Lynn Henthorn's case was ruled an accident at the time. They gave the Jeep back to Harold Henthorn. A lot of the evidence has been destroyed. You've actually had witnesses who have died in that case, other people whose memories have faded. So at this point, it's really going to be an uphill battle for Douglas County to make a case against Harold Henthorn in the death of Lynn Henthorn.
Still to come, prosecuting Harold Henthorn for Tony's death. The critical court battle that will determine if a jury will ever hear what happened to his first wife, Lynn.
Next week, Harold Henthorn will be appearing here in federal court in Denver. He currently faces one federal murder charge for the death of his second wife, Tony. He has pleaded not guilty in that case. Prosecutors will be arguing that as part of the Tony Henthorn case, they should be allowed to tell jurors about the death of Harold Henthorn's first wife, Lynn, in 1995, and about all the similarities between the two cases. Henthorn's lawyers are expected to mount strong arguments against admitting that evidence, since he was never criminally charged in the Lynn Henthorn case. As for the Henthorns' 9-year-old daughter, Haley, she's currently being cared for by family friends as her father awaits trial. I'm Brian Moss. Thanks for joining us for this CBS 4 special report.
It's creepy and it doesn't leave you. You remember.
You know, we're not getting Tony back, and so there's not going to be a happy ending.
2 wives died in the Rocky Mountains. No witnesses. He's clueless about, you know, how they die.
You don't think he's just a victim of bad luck?
No.
Not for a minute.
Nobody has that much bad luck.